So when you think about startups, what, in your opinion, is something that that is crucial to identifying high potential startups in the end? Also, because we are dealing with a very, very rapidly growing industry, right? Which is the blockchain industry. So when you look at all these deals coming in such a speed, how do you grasp what is high potential and what is not high potential?
Yeah, I'm trying I'm trying to get an opinion on various startups which I'm getting to know. People send me pitch decks, I meet them at conferences, and I'm very interested in what people are doing, just because startups are those innovations where we will talk about in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years. So when you have looks at like a good look at startups, you can see what happens in the future, because some of the startups are trying to build things which might be needed in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And therefore, I'm very curious, and I'm very happy to talk to all these startups. But of course, time is scarce. Therefore, you have to form a quick opinion on each startup, whether this might be interesting or not, whether it's worth it to spend a lot of time investigating their pitch deck or talking to them or meeting them or not, right? So what is important? So first of all, I think from a blockchain perspective, you have so many domains going on. As I have said previously, Web3, NFT, carbon trading. Then with the new regulation coming up in Europe, for example, the MiCA regulation, which is very interesting, coming to us next year, everything around digital asset will grow because the government is now allowing this and created licenses for this. Then we have Bitcoin and digital securities and this and that. So many, many, many topics. So you have to identify what topics are how mature and which topics will mature in the future. Now, let's make some examples. So the custody business, for example, companies providing custody solutions, this has already matured significantly. So it does make sense to found yet another company in the custody business. Then there are exchanges out there. Exchanges are Binance and the like. In my mind, this cluster of companies is also quite mature. It doesn't make so much sense to found yet another exchange. You can still found a custody company and an exchange if you wish. Everybody has to decide this for himself. But from a likelihood perspective, it's just more difficult than 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Then we have, for example, the on-chain analytics domain, which is still interesting, but we also see that the on-chain analytics domain is already maturing. That's companies like Tune Analytics. That's also the entire cluster of AML analytics companies. So there are still rooms to explore this, but you would have to be very fast. And then there are other domains, just to make some examples. So for example, carbon tokenization, which has not yet been discovered by the general public. So this is still a very good field to get started in because it's still very early, and there have not been any huge companies arising yet, but this will come in maybe 6 months, I would say so. NFTs, I don't believe in them so much unless you put them into the metaverse. The metaverse is largely existing on paper. We have some of the platforms such as Decentraland and Sandbox, so you can see here how this might be looking in the future. But also here, much of the developments have to be done in the future. So metaverse with all its facets should also be a very interesting domain, including mapping objects into the metaverse, scanning them, putting them in 3D rendering format, and so on and so forth. Endless opportunities there. Privacy is a topic which will come up in the future. So to summarize, I think it's key to try to make sense out of these sub-hypes which are going on and try to identify what hypes are already matured, which are currently on the rise, and which are so small and can potentially arise in the future. I think this is very important. Then second, I think the founders, as always, have to be the right ones. It need to be the best team is, in my personal opinion, like the really ideal team is a team where you have a tech guy who can do the programming part, who can do the design part, but who actually can do programming to some degree. He would then later on be the CTO and delegate and coordinate all technical things. And then a second founder should then be the CEO type of guy. And he is responsible to manage the entire project, but to primarily do marketing, sales, talking to customers, try to identify the true product, specify the product, and make the product such that somebody wants to pay for this in the future, right? This is the CEO task, right? That means in case you have a startup where there is nobody doing the marketing part or nobody doing the sales part because the CEO is just doing project management, then I would, for example, assume that there is one of the key parts missing in the startup, which is the outreach part, right? So that's basically the individual topic around founders. Then when we talk about blockchain, very often it's relevant from a regulatory perspective. We are dealing with money very often. So governments have installed their regulation, which we have to comply with. So you can easily say you are creating a new bank, but doing this and creating this takes you years and costs you millions. So yes, you can say it, but the likelihood is quite low that it will actually work out. And therefore, the intensity of regulatory burdenness, I think, needs to be inspected very well. You can do lightweight business models such as analytics or education things where regulatory stuff is not relevant. So you can grow more easily there, more speedily, but you can also try to form a custodian or a crypto exchange where then the regulatory stuff is very, very hard. So the regulatory dimension is very important, and it brings speed down in case it's regulatorily too intense, and it increases costs dramatically. Then next domain I would like to look at is the degree of internationality. And I think it doesn't make sense to just look at business models which might work in Germany. It makes more sense to look at business models which at least cover the entire European market. That could be MiCA regulated business models, or even more so business models where you can tackle the entire worldwide market. I think we have to understand that a market is not traditional like Germany, where people would consume specific services regardless of their age. Crypto is different. Crypto is more like orthogonal to this. You have a specific segment in the society, people between 20 and 45 who are very interested in this stuff, but it doesn't matter where they are. They can be in Singapore, in Germany, in France, in Argentina, and they could all be your customers in this worldwide ecosystem, because crypto is so international as nothing else previously. So this degree is very important because it allows a company to potentially grow and find customers somewhere on the planet. And maybe one more point, sorry for talking so long, Max, but one more point would be how would I call it? So which topics did we have? The maturity of the underlying area, then the team, CEO and CTO. Then we talked about the regulatory intensity. We talked about the international topic. And the last point I would like to mention is basically, is it B2C or is it B2B? Companies are not good at adopting blockchain technology. Think of Siemens, Bosch, Daimler, and all these companies. They haven't done many blockchain projects which are successful. Rather, the entire dynamic which we are seeing, be it Bitcoin or the metaverse, is driven by retail people. So in case you are a company which is servicing companies, then it might be much difficulter when you compare it to a company servicing individuals with their retail decisions, right? So from a tendency, I would rather go with companies servicing retail, because B2B and blockchain does not go hand in hand together easily. Some exceptions are those companies who are at least customer fronting. That's NFT stuff, for example. Companies issuing NFT, this works, but only because the consumer of NFT is a retail person, otherwise it would not work. Or carbon tokenization, CO2 offsetting, this is also for the companies, but immediately you see here very long sales cycles of 9 to 12 months. So you see here, you can be much more speedily in case you are addressing the retail market. So these are, I think, the 5 dimensions I would recommend to look at. And with this, they are also, in my mind, counterintuitive, because if you would compare this with the Web 2 realm, right? At that point of time, it was very easy to set up an online shop, create some goods, and just sell it and ship it via DHL to people in Germany. And here, younger founders have been very good at, setting up online shops. You didn't necessarily require the regulatory knowledge, where people are very often then 40 plus. Also, doing shipping is more something which can be done locally in Germany because of the logistics providers. It's done by, as I said, younger people. regulatory stuff doesn't play a role, and the international component in the beginning might not also play a role because logistics, for example, in e-commerce are local. So with this, you can easily see that the dimensions of how I would recommend viewing Web3 companies are, in my mind, very, very strongly different when you compare it to Web2 e-commerce topics minus 15 years ago. The only key point, which is exactly the same one, is the quality of the founder team. That's, as I said, the tech guy and the marketing, sales, management guy.